Hello, this is Clay from thejapanshop.com. Today I want to talk about what I wish I had known as a beginner, and more specifically how I would tell my younger self how to learn vocabulary words. We're going to look at two different aspects of vocabulary, first the sound and then the meaning. When I first started learning Japanese, I would hear a word and I'd say, I want to learn that word, so I'd write it down in romaji, in the alphabet, and get it as close as I could to what I thought would be the sound. But let me give you one reason why using romaji at all, even for learning new words, is not a good idea. First of all, you need to think of words in Japanese in moras instead of syllables. A mora is simply a unit of sound in Japanese. Take the word gakko, for example. It's actually 4 moras. Even though it is 2 syllables, gakko, but it's 4 moras because it is ga, chisai tsu, ko, and u. And that's how you should be thinking of words. So for example, you say ga, and then you have the space where that's still about the same unit of time. Ga, ko, u. It's like 4 beats, even if it's only 2 syllables. Ga, ko, u. If you use romaji, you won't be able to see that clearly. So my advice to myself, to my younger self, would be to write it out in kana. Next, and we can use the same example, gakko. Pay attention to the long vowels. Whenever there's an u, it makes the ko longer. Ko. So it's the same, it's 2 mora. It's 2 units of time. It's not gakko, but gakko. And while as a beginner, I didn't really pay too much of attention to it. I would just learn a word and I would say, I gotta go to gakko. But that's not the word. It's not gakko, it's gakko. And then the next thing I would tell myself is the small tsu. Pay attention to that. And again, this example is perfect. Gakko. As we said, this has 4 mora, or 4 units of time. And so therefore you would have that little bit of a space after the ga. And the last thing I would tell myself is pay attention to the pitch accent. It's not something that is incredibly important, especially if you're not living in Tokyo or not talking to someone using standard Japanese. But if you want to speak correct or standard Japanese, learning the standard pitch accents, it would be very helpful. If you want to learn more about that, I recommend Dogen's channel. He goes into this very, very deeply. I've been studying Japanese for over 20 years now, and I think the first few years I had no clue that there was any such thing as pitch accents. And the next thing I would tell myself is pay attention to the meaning, but don't learn words in isolation. How is this word used? In what context is this word used? In what context do you not use this word? Now, of course, you don't always have a native speaker to ask next to you while you're learning a word, but one trick is to learn words in phrases, not in isolation. And a lot of times there are verbs that go with nouns, or nouns that go with verbs. So for example, with ame, with rain, you say furu, falls, or it precipitates. You don't say ochiru. So learn vocabulary words as phrases, and that will go a long way to help you with understanding context. And it's also sometimes a 2-for-1, where you learn 2 words together and you can switch out the words with other options. For example, the ame ga furu example, it is raining, or it rains. You can say yuki ga furu, it is snowing. So by learning the phrase, you can learn other words that work with that pattern. So again, this is what I would tell myself as a beginner. I would say, look, pay attention to the long vowels, the small tsu. Yeah, pay attention a little bit to the pitch accent. You want to sound as good as you can as a non-native speaker. And then also learn words in phrases instead of in isolation. And that will help you a lot. Until next time, thank you for watching.